Hi, Fernando Morara of Agrural. In this video, I'm going to walk through U.S. soybeans and show you just how late they were planted. I'm also going to show you that many of the latest planted crops turned out to be just fine. We did not have a major yield problem. Only 77% of U.S. soybeans have been planted of June 23rd, which was the second slowest pace going back to 1986. If we look at U.S. soybean yields and how those compared to trend, going all the way back in all these different years, you can see that in the latest planted years, many of the crops turned out to be just fine. Notice that yields were generally just a little bit above or below zero, which is pretty close to trend. We didn't see big deviations to the negative side. We can isolate those out right here and show you just how those yields turned out. Most years, again, were pretty close to zero, meaning that we were pretty close to trend, with years like 1996 and 1986 a little bit above trend by about 1.5 bushels per acre, and the other years having been pretty close to trend. We weren't far below like you might see in different periods of time. This is what the yields would look like if we had an exact repeat of what happened in each one of these years and applied 2019 technology to it. For example, if the exact same thing as 1996 happened in 2019, we would expect a U.S. soybean yield of 51.3 bushels per acre. If the same thing as in 1995 happened, the yield might be around 49.5 bushels per acre. Well, why is this important? The USDA right now is right at 49.5 bushels per acre, and this is telling us that their yield forecast, at least as of right now, is looking pretty good. They're pretty close to the range here that we would expect in these latest planted years, and we don't have a real strong reason to start thinking that yields are much higher or much lower than where the USDA is at the moment. Well, how can this be? We planted super late, but how can we still have okay yields? Well, the reason is because summer weather is much more important than the planting date in the United States. Ideally, we would start out pretty dry at planting season, and then we would ramp up rainfall throughout the summer, and that's how we get the really nice soybean yields. Now, the planting season was very wet, so it will be difficult to have one of the best crops on record, but if it stays wet through the rest of the summer, then there might not be too much to worry about. And if we look at 1986, 1989, 1990, 95, and 96, which are the best analogs to this year's planting season, notice that many of these years stayed pretty wet throughout the summer, and that's why the yields turned out to be okay. We didn't see anything unusual here. Rainfall of 1 inch above normal is not super wet, it's just a little bit wet, and rainfall of a ½ inch below normal is pretty close to average. Basically, normal rainfall occurred in these different growing seasons, and if that happens again, we might expect the yield to turn out to be about the same as well. Well, rainfall is only part of the story. What about temperatures? In an ideal world, we would start out really warm in our spring, and then we would turn really cool in the summer. And that's because it's very cold here in the springtime, so if we have a mild spring, we can plant nice and early. But we really need it to be cool in the summer because we can have hot summers, and if you put a lot of heat on the soybean crop in the middle of the summer, you'll start lowering yield potential. But we can still get out of this situation that we have now with a late planted crop if it stays wet and it turns cool. Well, look at all these different years here. Most of them in the key months of July and August ended up being cooler than normal, or at least near normal. So we didn't see a big deviation to the warm side. The only exception was in 1995. In 1995, we did have a severe heat wave in August, and that followed a very late planted spring. And that's why the yield was pretty low at about 49.5 bushels per acre. But if we don't have a big heat wave later this summer, you might expect yields to be similar to that or above. And basically the point is that you can't go around thinking that the U.S. is going to have a bad crop because they planted late. It could turn out to be just fine, and most, if not all, of the latest planted years did turn out to be okay. Have a great day, and we'll talk again about corn in the next video report.